Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. My name is Tom.
Hi, I'm Stephanie.
And today we're going to talk about something called passive-aggressive behavior. And that, of course, is a psychological term. But just because psychologists study this doesn't mean that we use it ourselves in our daily lives. We actually use it quite a bit. Basically, we're trying to get something done or we're trying to convey a message, but we don't want to be too direct. So we use different strategies to accomplish that. If we're too direct, maybe somebody will think we're being, rude or something like that. So you need to be more subtle in order to express what you want to say.
But I have to say, for the record, if you're being passive-aggressive, you're probably irritating somebody even more than if you were just being direct. The passive-aggressive behavior drives me nuts. And we all do it occasionally. It's just the way we're built. Some people do it more than others. And if you... After you learn about this, I'm sure our listeners know what it is in Chinese. So we'll be talking about this in English today. But if I find out that a friend is really using this like manipulation on me a lot, I pretty much move on.
Right. Well, of course, Westerners like people to be direct. But, of course, in different cultures, they're all about subtlety, and I'm not quite sure how much here in Taiwan they use the passive-aggressive approach. They might use it a lot. They might not use it very much. I'm not quite sure. I don't dare say because I'm not from here. But you can discuss this amongst yourselves.
Yeah.
And right now we're going to dive into our subject today, passive-aggressive behavior. Let's read today's article in its entirety from top to bottom.
Before you get into today's article, just imagine this scenario for a second. You've just finished tidying the living room when your partner comes home. They notice the work you've done, but rather than praising or thanking you, they say something like, "Wow, so you do know how to use a vacuum cleaner." Let's assume that their attitude and the context makes it obvious that they're not joking. What do you think? You probably realize that they're upset with you, but you might not be sure why, because they haven't told you exactly why. The behavior displayed in this situation is passive-aggressive behavior. Passive-aggressive behavior is a way of subtly expressing displeasure with someone without being direct or confrontational. An example of passive-aggressive behavior might be someone deliberately delaying or not completing a task they've been asked to do. Another could be giving sarcastic responses to genuine questions, such as responding to, "How was your day?" with, "Not great, thanks to you." People who are being passive-aggressive might also sigh loudly or slam doors without saying why they're angry. There are many other ways that passive-aggressiveness can manifest itself. Passive-aggressiveness isn't an abnormal behavior. In fact, it's so common that we've almost likely been passive-aggressive at some point. However, passive-aggressiveness can cause lots of problems for everyone involved. This is because it negatively affects relationships by hiding feelings or the causes of feelings. This results in a lack of communication. Because there is inadequate communication, long-term underlying problems and frustrations don't get dealt with, making them worse.
It's time for us to talk about the contents of today's article. The title is Recognizing, Understanding, and Fixing Passive-Aggressive Behavior. So first of all, we need to recognize when it's happening, and then we need to understand why it's happening, and then we need to fix this particular kind of behavior. This title here kind of implies that passive-aggressive behavior is no good. Okay, if you're going to communicate with people, you need to be direct. You can't be subtle. article. And I should tell you what passive and aggressive means. Passive means you're not taking an active role in doing things. We often describe, say, women as being passive. They don't come out and tell their man exactly what they want. And then we describe men as being aggressive. They get out there. They want to make money in the market. They don't hold back. So that's kind of, those are kind of opposites there, passive and aggressive. But this behavior, of course, is when you use a passive approach to be actually aggressive.
Right. You're angry, but you're showing your, I guess you're showing your anger through ways that aren't quite clear, you could say. So it can be frustrating if you are dealing with someone who only knows how to display this sort of passive-aggressive behavior. Most of us have done it at some point, a lot maybe, and there are others who do it incessantly. So that's really what we're trying to warn against. Don't do it all the time or you'll lose your friends. So here, before we get into today's article, I thought this was a good scenario that our author came up with. Pretend you've just finished kind of cleaning up the living room. It's tidying up just means, there are probably books and clothes thrown around, scattered around. It's not really dirty. It's just a little messy. So you tidy up your living room or tidy the living room. Both are cool. And your partner comes home. Now, they look around, they notice the work you've done, but rather than saying, "Oh, thanks, this looks much better," or "Thanks, I kind of left some stuff out before I went to work. Thanks for picking up after me." Instead of doing something like that, they might say, "Wow, so you do know how to use a vacuum cleaner," which is actually sarcastic too.
Indeed. So I guess this implies that the first person doesn't really clean up the apartment or the living room very often.
Rarely, yeah.
Rarely. So this person is saying, "Wow, you finally did it. I bet you're not going to do that again in a long time." So, yeah, it's kind of a way of maybe attacking the other person using this passive kind of sentence that on the surface doesn't sound too bad, but underneath, of course, it's a jab or a dig at the other person. Yeah, you cleaned it this time, but gee, you haven't cleaned it in several months, and you probably won't clean it again for another several months. So, yeah, it's kind of an attack using a passive kind of statement. Now, let's assume that their attitude and the context makes it obvious that they're not joking. So let's assume this. Let's just think of this scenario, and we're assuming their attitude, and we also need to understand the context or the situation in which this is happening. And of course, if we do that, then it makes it obvious that they're not joking. They actually are trying to say something, but they're not being direct.
Right. So what do you think about this? How do you guys feel about this scenario? Have you had this happen to you before, or have you been the one who is passive-aggressive? I think this is a great unit to have a good discussion around it in your class. See what your classmates think about this. You probably realize, if you've been in this situation, that whoever's being passive-aggressive is upset with you. But sometimes you really don't know why they're mad. You think, well, maybe they had a bad day at work, or are they trying to criticize me by giving me this feeling that I never help around the house? So there are lots of different reasons. The reason it's passive-aggressive, though, is you don't know for sure why they're angry. So this behavior displayed in this situation is a really good example of being passive-aggressive.
Okay, so moving on now to the next paragraph, it goes on to say, passive-aggressive behavior is a way of subtly expressing displeasure with someone without being direct or confrontational. Now, here we've got the adverb subtly. That comes from the adjective subtle, which means you're not being direct, you're not being clear. People would not totally understand what you're saying. We use the word subtle when we talk about art sometimes. A painting doesn't really come out and tell you what it's trying to say, so you have to study it and you kind of have to guess. It's very subtle. The messages are subtle, they're not direct, they're indirect. And yes, indeed, this is a subtle way of expressing displeasure with someone, but you don't want to be too direct and you don't want to be confrontational. So you do want to convey some kind of message to that person, but you're afraid of maybe appearing too aggressive, and then you'll just start an argument or something like that, or they won't understand you. So you choose to be passive and not direct because you fear confrontation. You don't want to be confrontational, which means people have a conflict with each other.
Right. The other day, I was trying to find out what a friend of mine really enjoys doing in her free time. And so I asked somebody else to try to ask around and see if anybody else knew. It was a subtle way of me trying to find out what kind of birthday gift I wanted to give to this person without directly saying, hey, what do you like? What can I get for you? You want to give gifts that are surprising sometimes. So you want to be subtle about it. So I was subtly asking other people. And confrontational, a lot of times you'll have bosses that are very confrontational. Why aren't you done with this piece of work I gave you? And then other times you'll have coworkers or maybe some classmates who are confrontational. You didn't do your part of this project. That's not fair. I see this less in Taiwan than I do in America. We're pretty confrontational if we're not happy, although there are a lot of people who aren't.
Right.
So you have to, it's not so much a cultural thing. I think it depends on someone's personality and what they're comfortable or uncomfortable with. An example of passive-aggressive behavior might be someone deliberately delaying or not completing a task they've been asked to do. I was a boss before I moved to Taiwan, had a staff, and this was definitely something I saw. If they weren't happy about me giving them a piece of work, they would delay it as long as they could. And I think it was just to make me pissed off or make me mad, But that's another way you can be passive-aggressive.
So it probably happens at work or in school or whatever, or in the family, in your relationship. I'm sure we've all experienced this from time to time. Okay, that brings us to the midway point in our lesson for today. Let's listen now to our Chinese teacher who will be very direct with you.
Hello everyone, 我是派老师。今天讲解的是6月21号 Unit 12 Recognizing, Understanding and Fixing Passive-Aggressive Behavior 的课程。这是 Day 1。这篇文章带我们了解一种行为模式 Passive-Aggressive。大家对于英文名称或许有点陌生，不过生活当中或许都经历过，不难想见 Passive-Aggressive 到底是什么样子。其实这对当事人还有和他相处的人来说都是很辛苦的经历。和其他人相处的时候，我们可以尽量避免进入这种行为模式，也可以观察他人行为有哪些迹象出现的时候就构成了 passive-aggressive。 那进一步的知道应该要怎么跟他们相处，化解问题。好，我们直接看课文。第一段的写作方式有点不一样，第一句并不是主题句，没有直接告诉读者段落大意，而是要大家想象一个情境，之后的句子叙述了是什么样的情境，方便读者了解 passive-aggressive behavior 这种行为模式。我们接着进一步看看这5个句子里有哪些文法重点。首先，第一个句子里面 Just imagine the scenario。 Scenario 就是情境的意思。再来，请同学看到第2个句子 They notice the work you've done, but rather than praising or thanking you， 这边的 they 就是指对别人哦。那别人他们会注意到说你到底做了哪些事情，可是他并没有称赞你。 Rather than 这里其实就相当于 instead of， 他并没有称赞你或感谢你，反而是酸言酸语的说 Wow, so you do know how to use a vacuum cleaner。 好，那在这边呢，情境当中就说明了，其实对方在说这样子的话的时候呢，其实他并不是在开玩笑的。从上下文，从态度来判断，并不是在开玩笑。那其实当我们听到这样子的话，知道对方不是在开玩笑的时候，就可以感受得出来，其实他们不高兴。 They're upset with you. Be upset with someone 其实是对什么人不高兴，但是因为对方又没有说明，只是感觉起来不高兴， 那这样子的情况就是 passive aggressive， 也就是不高兴却不明说。再来，我们看到第二段这里，第二段的第一句，其实就对于 passive aggressive behavior 提供了正式的定义。这一句就是正式的定义，就是他们用很细微的方式表达不悦，并没有直截了当说出来，也不会撕破脸。请同学看到 confrontational 这个形容词，其实就是一副咄咄逼人，要找人吵架的样子。再来，请看到第二个句子，这当中在逗点之前 deliberately delaying 这个副词是故意的，请同学特别注意。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back, guys. We're talking about the passive-aggressive behavior that we see in our world. And, you know, what it is, what it feels like, and perhaps how we can fix it. Because sometimes it just makes relationships more difficult. Whatever kind of relationship we're talking about. It could be a boss to an employee, or friend to friend, or maybe classmate to classmate.It's just, it's hard to deal with if that's the only kind of behavior somebody exhibits or shows.
Exactly. So we just gave you an example of passive-aggressive behavior. You might delay something on purpose because you're not happy with it. Another example could be giving sarcastic responses to genuine questions, such as responding to How was your day? With not great, thanks to you. We should mention that sarcasm is when you kind of say something the opposite to convey a message. And sarcastic, of course, depends a lot on the tone of your voice.
Right.
Okay, so in this case, you could say, not great, thanks to you. But you could say, not great, thanks to you. That would be very sarcastic.
And I just wanted to warn people, if you're in business, it's best never to use sarcasm in written communication because we can't see your face, we can't hear the inflection of your tone, and it's dangerous. So I know people will sometimes use emojis, but I just recommend that you stay away from sarcasm all the time if you're writing to coworkers or your boss in business or clients for that matter. It's hard to tell. But usually you can see if someone's sarcastic looking at their face. But I know it's something that's kind of difficult if you're speaking a different language than your own. So it might be harder for you to sense that or get that at first. But a lot of Americans use it. Well, British use it as well. So it's something that you have to learn quickly if you're learning English to do business in especially.
My experience is that sarcasm is very difficult for people in Taiwan to deal with if it's coming from Westerners. We tend to use it more often in Western culture, not just the United States, but other Western countries as well. So I guess you just have to be prepared and realize sarcasm may not be an attack. It might be just done for fun.
Sometimes,
It could be just being ironic or something. And people who are being passive-aggressive might also sigh loudly. Slam doors without saying why they're angry. And there are many other ways that passive aggressiveness can manifest itself. There are other ways that it can be shown or displayed in human behavior.
Yeah, that's what manifest means, to show, to display. So if you get tired of using those verbs, try manifest. It's great. It reminded me of teens as I saw this sentence. They will often, if their parents ask them to do something, or my brothers would slam doors when they were teens. They stopped doing that after they got to a certain age. But yeah, that's one way to let someone know how you're feeling, I think you could say. There are many other ways that passive aggressiveness can show itself, though. Passive aggressiveness isn't an abnormal behavior. If it's abnormal, it means normal people just don't do it. But it isn't an abnormal behavior. Two negatives make a positive. So it is a normal behavior. I think most everyone on this planet at some time has been passive-aggressive.
Right, so if you are passive-aggressive, you don't have to worry that you're losing your mind or that you're mentally ill or something like that. It is very common. In fact, it's so common that we've all most likely been passive-aggressive at some point. Yeah, sometimes we just don't want to be direct. We're not brave enough, or we just don't want to deal with being direct, and we don't want to tell mom and dad that we don't like it, that we have to do our chores or whatever. We don't want to come out and directly tell our friend that they insulted us or something like that, etc., etc. So, yeah, we all do it from time to time, but it's still not healthy, but still it's common. However, passive aggressiveness can cause lots of problems for everyone involved. So here is the verb to involve. That means you're part of a situation, you're connected with that situation. So yes, indeed, if you're involved in a situation, if you're part of a situation in which passive aggressiveness is being used, then it can be troublesome for yourself or for others.
And I think this next sentence is very important as to why we need to avoid being passive-aggressive. It says here, this is because it negatively affects relationships. How does it do that? Well, it hides true feelings, or it hides the real causes of your emotions. Why is someone acting that way? Unless you really get them to sit down and be honest with you, you're not going to find out. So it is a bad way to conduct a relationship, especially if it's a partner relationship where you're married. That can be really difficult. But even with friends, it's very hard. So make sure that you keep your relationship open and that you can continue to have a real dialogue. Otherwise, those problems just kind of pile up and they get worse and worse and worse.
Right, and maybe some people might say that being too direct is a problem.
Yeah.
You're always mentioning problems or something. So some people may say that sometimes passive-aggressive behavior is actually preferable to being direct. But I think according to the writer here, and I think we would agree that using it too much is not a good thing. And again, we want to stress communication here. Yes, indeed, it negatively affects relationships because it hides our feelings and it hides the causes of feelings.
Yeah.
And this results in a lack of communication. Communication is the act of communicating, which is when you exchange information with another person. And in life, of course, we don't always get along with people 100%. So sometimes we have to figure out ways to smooth each other's feathers, to iron out the situations and figure out what's going on. A lot of people think that if you just sit down and talk about your problems, they'll magically go away. It helps sometimes, but I think in a lot of cases, things just can't be solved, and you need to agree to disagree.
Yep. In fact, Tom used a really great phrase there to smooth someone's feathers. If you're upset, sometimes we'll say, you ruffled someone's feathers. I'll say as a joke, someone's fur just, fur rose up. If an animal is angry or scared, sometimes their fur just rises, especially cats, dogs. Of course, chickens, their feathers will be ruffled if they're upset. Yeah, you don't want to ruffle any feathers. You want to keep your relationship to the point where you can work smoothly together and not yell or have problems like that. Sometimes there's inadequate communication. Inadequate means you don't have enough of something. You may be not getting enough sleep. Your sleep is inadequate. Or I read just a couple of months ago, we had a lake area in Taiwan where the water was inadequate. We hadn't had enough rainfall, so it was drying up. So sometimes there are long-term underlying problems and frustrations that are there in a relationship, and if you don't deal with them, it can make them worse. Underlying means something that is kind of the reason behind sometimes the reactions that you get. What is the real problem that's not being talked about? Sometimes we We say to the kids, oh, you can't yell, but why are they yelling? You need to find out why they're yelling. They feel like they have to use that sort of anger and emotion instead of finding out what the underlying problem is, the real problem.
Right, so you may not understand why your partner is angry with you.
Yeah.
It might turn out to be the way you wash the dishes and the way you put the dishes in the dryer. Maybe you stack them in a way that she or he does not like, but they're afraid to come out and tell you shouldn't put the rice bowls on top of the bowls like that. They'll fall down and break. But they won't come out and tell you. And if they don't come out and tell you, then you're just not going to know what the problem is. They'll continue to be angry at you. You get the idea. So you've got these underlying problems and frustrations. Frustration means you have a blocked need. You can't get what you want, so you feel frustrated. Frustration is the act of being frustrated. And you don't get dealt with, or at least those problems don't get dealt with or handled, and those problems will get worse and worse. Okay, that brings us to the end of our explanation for today. Let's turn things over now to our Chinese teacher.
接下来请同学看到第二段第3个句子。那还有另外一种表现的方式，表现 passive aggressive 是像怎么做呢？他们可能会刻意的讽刺，说 Another could be giving sarcastic responses to genuine questions.你是真正有问题，可是他们的反应呢，却并不是那么真诚，好像是在讽刺。像你问他说，你还好吗？ How was your day? 今天过得怎么样？结果呢，他就回答你 Not great, thanks to you. 意思就是，多亏了你，我今天过得不怎么样。好，那像这样子的情况也是 passive aggressive。还有另外一种情况呢，就是会刻意大声的叹气，或者呢，就是也没有说他到底为什么生气，就大声的摔门 slam doors。以上都是表达这种 passive aggressive 的方式。再来第5个句子，请同学特别注意到这个动词 manifest itself。好，以 passive aggressiveness 当作主词，就是这样子的行为，它会如何的呈现，如何的表现。那我们的动词呢，就用 manifest， 它是如何呈现出来的。再来，请同学看到第3段。看到第3段这边，其实我们先看它的内容。Passive aggressiveness， 它其实很多人都有这样子的行为模式。问题是，这样的行为模式其实是会造成我们人际上面的沟通困难。所以我们看到第3个句子这里说 Passive aggressiveness can cause lots of problems for everyone involved。 对当事人或者他周边的人其实都会造成困扰。那下面就讲到了，其实最主要是因为它会造成负面的影响，因为你等于是隐藏自己的感受，那也不去说明为什么你会不高兴。那接下来第5个就讲第5个句子就讲得很明白，这样会造成沟通不良。This results in a lack of communication， 就会缺乏沟通，双方就没有沟通。那时间久了，当然就会酿成更大的问题。好，我们再看第6个句子，如果没有充分的沟通会怎么样呢？ Because there's inadequate communication， 因为没有充分的沟通，所以 inadequate 就是没有充分的，不充分的，就会变成会有长期的潜在的问题 long-term underlying problems and frustration。 那这些问题呢都没有办法解决，之后就会变得更糟糕。好，以上就是我们针对 passive aggressive 这种行为模式在第1天课程所做的中文讲解，谢谢大家。
That's all the time we have for today, but please join us again next time when we continue to talk about passive-aggressive behavior. From all of us here at English Digest, my name is Tom.
I'm Stephanie.
Goodbye.
Bye.